They started digging under their house for a simple repair, but the moment their shovel hit something soft, it moved. Not like dirt, not like wood, like something alive, buried just inches below their feet, and what they uncovered next should never have been found. Stay with me, because this only gets worse. The shovel hit something soft at 6 feet deep, and Marcus Webb knew immediately, in the way your body knows things before your brain catches up, that he should have left it alone. He should have dropped the shovel, climbed out of that trench, walked back inside, locked the basement door, and called a realtor to take the house back. That's what every instinct in him was screaming, every nerve ending. Every piece of whatever ancient wiring keeps humans alive when they're standing too close to something wrong. But Marcus didn't drop the shovel. He crouched down. He started brushing the dirt away with his hands. And what he uncovered in the soil beneath that old Kentucky farmhouse would unravel the next 18 months of his life and force him to confront something that no amount of rational thinking could ever fully explain away. Stay right here. Don't go anywhere. Because this story doesn't go where you think it's going, and the ending is going to change the way you look at old houses, old land, and the things that people bury when they don't know what else to do with them. Welcome to the Fear Sermon. If you're new here, you have no idea what you just walked into, and I mean that in the best possible way. Hit that like button right now and subscribe, because we do this every week. Real stories, deep dives. The kind of thing that follows you home. If you've been here before, you already know to get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a while, and this one is worth every minute. Now let's go back to the beginning. Marcus Webb was 34 years old when he bought the Cartwright property in Harlan County, Kentucky. He was a mechanic, born and raised in Louisville, recently divorced, recently hollowed out in that specific way that a long and failing marriage hollows a person out, and he was looking for the one thing that divorce and distance and time can sometimes give you if you're lucky enough to find it. A clean start. Somewhere quiet, somewhere that was just his. His cousin had mentioned the farmhouse almost in passing, the way people mention things they don't think you'll actually do. She said it was old, needed work, but the land was beautiful and the price was almost nothing. Marcus had been in Louisville his whole life, and Louisville had started to feel like a skin he'd outgrown. So he drove down. Harlan County is in the southeastern corner of Kentucky, tucked up against the Virginia border in the Cumberland Mountains. It's the kind of place that people from other parts of the country don't think about very much, but the people who are from there carry it with them the way mountain people always carry them. Geography, the land is old. The mountains there are among the oldest in North America, worn down by hundreds of millions of years into something that looks gentle on the surface, but holds a deep, patient, geological seriousness underneath. The people who have lived there for generations understand something about that land that people who arrive from cities don't automatically understand. The land has memory, it keeps things. The farmhouse sat on 11 acres. It was built sometime around 1912, a 2-story white clapboard structure with a wide front porch, original hardwood floors, a massive stone fireplace in the front room, and a kitchen that had last been updated sometime during the Reagan administration. It had good bones, as people say about old houses. It had the feeling of something that had survived things. Marcus walked through it with a realtor named Patricia, who spoke very quickly and seemed very eager to get back to her car. And Marcus noticed this but filed it away as a personality trait rather than a signal. He put in an offer 3 days later. It was accepted within the hour. He moved in on a cool Saturday in late September, carrying boxes with the help of a friend who drove down from Louisville and left by dinner time. And Marcus sat on his front porch that first night and listened to the mountains and felt, for the first time in a long time, like he might be okay, like things might work out. Like this was the right place. The feeling lasted almost exactly 1 week. He noticed the crack on the 7th day. He had been putting off going into the basement, not for any specific reason he could name, just a low-level resistance he couldn't account for. The basement was accessed through a door in the kitchen, a thick wooden door painted over so many times the edges had started to seal themselves shut. And every time Marcus passed it, he had a vague formless sense that he wasn't in a hurry to open it. He told himself this was irrational. He told himself he was tired, that moving into a new place is exhausting, that basements were for storage and he'd get to it when he got to it. On day 7, he forced himself to open the door. The smell was the first thing. Not a sewage smell, not a rotting smell, nothing with a name he could attach to it. Just something old and closed, in and fundamentally still, the way air smells when it hasn't moved in years. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then flipped the light switch. A bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs came on. He went down. The basement was unfinished. Concrete walls, concrete floor, exposed wooden joists overhead. Old metal shelving along the south wall, mostly empty except for a few old glass canning jars with dried residue inside. A rusted water heater in the corner, not much else. Marcus walked the perimeter, and that's when he saw the crack. It was on the north-facing wall, starting near the top where the wall met the ceiling and traveling diagonally downward in a slow curve, thin as a pen line at the top but widening as it descended. He ran his finger along it. The concrete felt dry, no moisture seeping through. He pressed his palm flat against the wall. Cold, solid. He told himself it was settling. Old houses settle. He went back upstairs. Over the next several days, the crack changed. This is important. This is the thing that separated it from a normal settling crack in Marcus's mind. Because Marcus was a mechanic, and mechanics develop a particular kind of attention to detail, a habit of noticing when something has moved that wasn't moved before. By day 4, the crack was wider. By day 6, he could fit the tip of his finger into it. And on day 7, standing at the bottom of the basement stairs in the morning light, he was almost certain the wall was bowing slightly inward, a subtle curve that hadn't been there before. Something was pushing from outside. He called Danny. Danny Webb was 2 years older than Marcus, built wide and solid, opinionated and usually right, the kind of older brother who arrives with tools and a theory and a patience for physical work that Marcus had always admired. He drove down from Lexington on a Friday evening, went straight to the basement, looked at the wall for about 30 seconds and said very simply, "Something's pushing from the other side." He meant it as a structural diagnosis. Underground water pressure, maybe, shifting clay. It happened in this region. The fix was to dig down along the exterior of the foundation wall, assess the damage, add drainage if needed. A weekend job, hard but manageable. They started at 8 on Saturday morning with 2 shovels and Danny's wheelbarrow. The soil came up easily for the first 2 feet, loose and dark, the kind of soil that turns over like it wants to cooperate. Below that it got harder, more compacted, requiring real effort to break up and move. They worked along the north wall, opening a trench about 2 feet wide, trading off every 30 minutes or so, not talking much, the way men who are comfortable with each other sometimes work in silence. By noon they were down about 3 feet. The wall looked fine from the outside. No cracks visible from this side. No obvious water seepage. Danny's theory was not proving itself out, but Danny pressed on, because that's what Danny did. It was around 2 in the afternoon when Marcus's shovel hit something that wasn't soil or rock. The sound was wrong. Not the hard crack of metal on stone, not the dull thud of packed clay. Something in between. A sound with a slight give to it. A sound that had no business being 6 feet underground. Marcus scraped the blade of the shovel across the surface of it and felt resistance. He crouched down and started brushing the dirt away with his hand. Fabric, old, dark with age, coming apart at the edges, but unmistakably woven fabric. He kept brushing. More fabric, and under the fabric, a shape, something with dimension. A curve that his hands knew before his brain had finished processing what it was telling him. A curve that belonged to the vocabulary of the human body, the vocabulary of bones and ribs and architecture of things that were once alive. He called Danny over without saying anything. They both crouched there in the dirt looking at it, neither of them speaking for what felt like a full minute. The afternoon light was slanting into the trench, and the smell that came up from around the thing was the same smell from the basement. that old, closed, still absence of smell, like the air around. It had gone somewhere else. Danny spoke first. He said quietly, "Don't touch it anymore." Marcus had already pulled his hands back. He hadn't made a decision to do that. It had just happened. They covered it with a sheet of plywood, climbed out of the trench, went inside, and sat at the kitchen table with 2 beers and the particular silence of 2 people who are both thinking the same thing, and neither one wants to be the first to say it out loud. Marcus looked at the basement door. Danny looked at his hands. The afternoon turned into evening. At 5:30, Danny picked up his phone and called the county sheriff's office. The deputy who arrived was named Rourke. He was middle-aged, weathered, unhurried in the way of a man who had been doing a job long enough that he'd seen most of what it had to offer. He looked at the trench, looked at the plywood, looked at both brothers and said simply, "Let's see what we've got." They uncovered it together. It was a process that took almost 20 minutes, because what was buried there was not a simple thing. There were multiple layers, an outer wrapping of heavy cloth, folded and bound with what had been rope, now mostly disintegrated into fiber and memory. Inside that, another layer, darker, almost black, stiff and leathery like treated hide. And this inner layer was stitched closed, tightly, deliberately, with small uniform stitches that were nothing like the decay and deterioration of everything surrounding them. Someone had sewn this thing shut with care, with intention. When Rourke finally peeled back the outer layer, he took a step back. Both brothers stepped back without realizing they'd done it. The smell that rose up was impossible to describe, Marcus says, except to say that it was like all the normal scents of earth and evening and autumn just ended within 3 feet of that thing. Like the air died. Like you were suddenly breathing something that had never been touched by wind or sunlight. The object was roughly 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. It had the density of something that contained many smaller things. It did not look like a single body, it looked like a container. A deliberately constructed, carefully sealed, purposefully buried container. 6 feet underground, directly beneath the north wall of the foundation, where the crack had appeared. Rourke called it in. He was required to treat it as a potential crime scene. He secured the area, told Marcus not to touch anything, and said the state forensic unit would be out Monday morning. That was Saturday evening. It was a very long weekend. Marcus didn't sleep well Saturday night. He woke at 2 in the morning from a dream he couldn't immediately remember, with a headache sitting behind his eyes like a weight and a feeling of being watched that he had to consciously talk himself down from. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and told himself over and over that he was just stressed, that finding something strange on your property was stressful, that this was a completely rational response to an unusual situation. By the 3rd or 4th repetition of this, it was starting to feel less true. He turned on the lamp. Better. He left it on until morning. Sunday, he called his cousin who had told him about the house. She knew nothing. She had never spent any real time there. She suggested the County Historical Society if he wanted to know more about the property's past. The Historical Society was closed on Sundays, which left Marcus with nothing to do but rattle around the house with the patient, building dread of someone who has been told a problem exists but is not allowed to start working on it yet. He cleaned things. He arranged his tools in the garage. He watched television and retained nothing. And sometime around 10 in the evening, he went back down to the basement. He didn't decide to do this. He was suddenly just there, standing at the bottom of the stairs with his phone flashlight on, the way you sometimes find yourself in a room without a clear memory of walking there. The smell was stronger, or he was imagining it was stronger, and he wasn't sure which of those possibilities was more disturbing. He moved the flashlight around the room, the shelves, the water heater, the cracked north wall. And then on the floor, in the corner nearest the north wall, something he had somehow missed on every previous visit. A circle on the concrete floor, about 3 feet across. Old, faded, the lines blurred by years of settling dust, but once seen, completely impossible to unsee. It was made up of interlocking lines, a complex geometry with symbols distributed inside the outer ring, small careful marks that were clearly intentional and clearly organized, though in no system Marcus could identify, not religious iconography he'd seen before, not any alphabet, something older maybe, or something private, something that belonged to a tradition he had no access to. He crouched in front of it for a long time. He did not touch it. He took a photograph with his phone. Then he went upstairs, locked the basement door, turned on every light in the house, and sat on the couch until the sun came up. The state forensic team arrived Monday morning in 2 vehicles. 3 people, professional, efficient, economy of words. They took the wrapped object away in a van and spent several hours photographing everything. The one who came to Marcus's door afterward was a woman in her 40s, short hair, a face that gave very little away. She asked if he had found anything else unusual. He showed her the photograph of the circle. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked up at him. Then she asked if she could come inside and look. She went through every room. She spent the longest time in the basement. When she came back up to the kitchen, she said she needed to make a phone call and stepped outside. Marcus watched through the window. She walked to the far side of the yard, turned her back to the house, and talked for close to 15 minutes. Her free hand moved in a way that looked like someone explaining something complicated to someone who was disagreeing. When she came back in, she was composed, professional, everything buttoned up. She gave Marcus a case number, said someone would follow up, and was heading for the door when she stopped and turned back as if something had just occurred to her. She asked, almost as an aside, how long he'd been living in the house. He said 3 weeks. She nodded. Then she said, "Have you had any unusual dreams since you moved in?" And before Marcus could fully process what an extraordinary question that was, she added quickly, "It's standard procedure." Smiled briefly and walked to her van. It was not standard procedure. They both knew that. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived from the state. The contents of the buried bundle had been identified as animal remains, multiple species, preserved through a combination of desiccation and what the letter carefully termed intentional preparation. The items were estimated to be between 80 and 120 years old. The letter used the phrase ritualistic in character. It noted that no evidence of criminal activity had been found. The case was closed. Animal remains. Ritualistic in character. Case closed. Marcus read the letter 3 times and then set it on his kitchen table and looked at it and understood with complete clarity that the official story was a door being closed, not an answer being given. He drove to the County Historical Society the following morning. The Historical Society was housed in a converted Victorian house near the courthouse square, staffed by volunteers who were mostly retired locals with a genuine and deep-seated love of Harlan County's history. The woman who sat with Marcus that morning was named Edna Lyle, 78 years old, small and sharp-eyed, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of precise, organized memory that some people develop when they've spent decades caring about the details of things. She knew the Cartwright property the moment Marcus described the location. She knew it the way people know places that have a story attached to them, places that mean something beyond their coordinates. The last person named Cartwright to live on that land was a woman named Della Cartwright. She had been born on the property in 1901, the youngest of 4 children, and she had outlived her entire family and remained on the land alone from sometime in the late 1930s until her disappearance in September of 1961. Edna said disappearance the way you say a word you've said many times, carefully, with a built-in neutrality that comes from having explained something complicated to many different people over many years. Della had never married. She had no children that anyone knew of. She was known in the broader community, and Edna paused here in a way that had weight to it, as a healer. Marcus asked what that meant specifically. Edna took her glasses off and set them on the table. She said that in Harlan County in that era, the word healer covered a broad range of practices. At one end, it meant someone who knew herbal medicine, who could set a broken bone or help a difficult delivery when no doctor was within 20 miles. At the other end, it meant something older and more complicated. Something that traced back through the mountain communities to traditions that had come over from Europe with the earliest settlers and had mixed over generations with older knowledge already present in the land. Edna called it working, which was a word Marcus learned was used by people in those communities to describe folk magic, specifically the Appalachian variety, which was practical, unglamorous, and deeply serious. Della Cartwright, Edna said, was a worker, not unusual in itself. There had been workers in Harlan County for as long as there had been people in Harlan County. What made Della specific, what made her name linger in the memory of the oldest residents, was the scale of what she was believed to have done on that property over the course of decades, and the nature of what went wrong at the end. Marcus asked her to keep going. The belief in the community, Edna said, the whispered understanding that had passed between certain people for 60 years, was that Della Cartwright had spent the better part of her adult life deliberately cultivating a relationship with something in the land, not a ghost, not a spirit in any simple or familiar sense. Something older, something that existed in the deep geology of the place, the way certain minerals exist in rock, present and real, but not usually accessible to human interaction. Della had been skilled enough and patient enough to make contact with it over years of working, to call it up incrementally, carefully, to develop what Edna described, choosing her words with great deliberateness, as a working relationship. And then, at some point, the relationship had changed. The thing Della had spent decades cultivating had grown beyond what she had anticipated, had developed what Edna called an intention, a specificity. And Della, who understood these things better than almost anyone alive at that time, had recognized that what she had nurtured into presence had become something she could no longer entirely trust. So she had contained it. She had used everything she knew to bind it to a specific place, to manage its awareness, to keep it satisfied so that it would remain in the ground and not spread. The objects buried beneath the foundation were part of this containment. The circle on the basement floor was part of this containment. The entire physical structure of the house, the way it had been maintained over decades, the way Della had arranged and preserved and tended it, was part of a single long, complex, living working, designed to keep something in place. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he asked what had happened to the containment after Della disappeared. Edna put her glasses back on. She said that was the question people had been careful not to ask out loud for 60 years. The belief in those who knew enough to have a belief was that the containment had held. That Della's work had been thorough enough and deep enough that it maintained itself even after she was gone. The objects stayed buried, the circle stayed intact, the thing stayed in the ground. Marcus had dug up the objects on day 7 of living there. He had noticed this at the Historical Society. He had been doing the math since before Edna finished her sentence. He said quietly, and if someone disturbed the containment. Edna looked at him directly. She said, that depends on what they disturbed and how much. She told him about Hobart Combs, who had been 15 years old in September 1961, and whose property had been adjacent to Cartwright Farm. Hobart had passed away 12 years ago, but his account had been given to investigators at the time, and had also been recorded by the Historical Society in a later oral history project. He had seen a light in the basement window of the Cartwright house on the night of September 14th, very late, past midnight. And then the light had gone out, and then there had been a sound. Investigators had recorded it in their notes as a scream. Hobart had corrected this every time anyone quoted it back to him. He said it was not a scream. He said it was not a human sound at all. He said it was more like something ending. Like the sound a large fire makes when it's suddenly deprived of oxygen and goes out all at once, except much larger, and with a quality to it that he had never been able to describe with any word. That felt accurate. Something ending, and then silence. And in the morning, Della Cartwright was gone. The house was empty, everything inside undisturbed, no sign of a struggle or departure. Her clothes were still in the wardrobe. Her dishes were still in the cabinet. Her shoes were still by the door. Della Cartwright was never found. Not then, not ever. Marcus drove back to the farmhouse in a state of what he later described as controlled panic. He sat in his truck in the driveway for a while before going inside. He was a mechanic from Louisville. He was a rational person. He had spent his whole life operating in a world where things had explanations, and those explanations could be found with sufficient effort. He knew what he believed, or he had known, up until approximately 11 days ago. Now he sat in his truck outside an old house in the Kentucky mountains and tried to hold two things in his mind at the same time: the rational framework that had served him all his life, and the collection of facts in front of him that did not fit inside that framework, no matter which direction he turned them. He called Danny. He told him everything: Edna, Della Cartwright, the working, the containment, all of it. Danny listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Danny. When Marcus finished, Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he asked one question. He asked, "Are you still having the dreams?" Marcus had not told Danny about the dreams. He had barely admitted them to himself. They had started on night one and had been getting more specific every night since. At first, just a presence in the room, a shape in the corner, the feeling of being watched with an intensity that sleep and darkness made impossible to dismiss. Then, over days, the shape had become more defined. It stood in the posture of a woman, wore the approximate outline of a woman, but there was something wrong with the fit of it, the way a coat looks when it's worn by someone it wasn't made for. The shape in the corner of his room watched him sleep with what he could only describe as furious patience. Not the anger of something that wanted to cause harm. The anger of something that had been waiting for a very long time, and had just discovered that the terms of its waiting had been changed without its consent. Yes, he was still having the dreams. Danny came back to Harlan County the following Thursday. This time he brought tools of a different kind, not shovels and wheelbarrows, but a pen and a notebook, and the willingness to follow Marcus wherever this needed to go. They went back to see Edna Lyle. Edna connected them, after some consideration, with a woman she called old type, which Marcus came to understand was a specific and respectful term for someone still actively practicing the old Appalachian traditions. This woman, who asked not to be named, was in her mid-60s, lived alone on the far side of the county, and received Marcus and Danny in a kitchen that smelled like dried herbs and wood smoke. She poured them coffee without asking if they wanted it. She listened to everything Marcus said without taking notes and without asking him to repeat himself. When he finished, she said only, "I know that property." She said it the way you say something you've been waiting to say for years. She came to the farmhouse on a Tuesday. She moved through it differently than any visitor Marcus had had, slower, more deliberate, pausing in places that seemed arbitrary until Marcus realized she was pausing in the same spots every time, returning to them, attending to something in the air of those spots that he couldn't perceive. She spent the most time in the basement. She stood in front of the circle for close to 10 minutes without speaking. She went outside and walked the perimeter of the house twice, then walked outward in a wider circle through the yard, all the way to the tree line. When she came back inside and sat at Marcus's kitchen table, her face was careful in a way that serious people's faces get when they're deciding how to say something true without making it unnecessarily frightening. She told him that what Della Cartwright had bound was not something with a name in any tradition she knew. It was not demonic in the Christian sense. It was not a ghost or a spirit in the way those words were commonly used. It was something genuinely old, something that had existed in the land of that particular place for far longer than any human presence in the region, something that under normal circumstances would never have intersected with human life at all. But Della had been gifted, and she had worked that property for so many years, had put so much of herself into the land that she had essentially made herself into a bridge. And across that bridge, over time, something had come. And when it came, it had found the world more interesting than expected, and staying had seemed preferable to leaving, and Della had recognized eventually that she had created a situation she could not undo, only manage. The woman told Marcus that the circle on the floor was still functional. Whatever Della had put into it, whatever intention she had embedded in those symbols, was still present and still operating. This was important. This was in fact the reason that 63 years of new owners and empty winters and general neglect had not resulted in something much worse than one man's disturbed sleep and bad dreams. The circle had held the secondary containment. The objects buried beneath the foundation had been the outer layer, the first line of management. What Marcus had dug up was the outer layer. The inner layer, the circle, was intact. If he had disturbed the circle, she said, looking at him steadily, the conversation they were having right now would not have been possible, because there would not have been a situation to have a conversation about. Marcus asked what she meant by that. She said it plainly. She said that without the circle, without Della's primary containment still functioning in the basement floor, what was in the land beneath that house would not simply be having opinions about Marcus's sleep. It would be present, not in any cinematic movie monster sense. Present in the way that something with no body and no form, but a great deal of intention, becomes present when the things keeping it in place are removed. You wouldn't see it. You might not even recognize it as something external at first, but it would be there in every thought, in every decision, in the slow erosion of whatever made you yourself. People lost themselves to things like this, she said, not dramatically but gradually, the way a riverbank loses itself to water. A little at a time, until one day there isn't much bank left. The circle was holding for now, but the situation was unstable, and the thing in the ground was more aware of Marcus than it had been of any resident in decades, because Marcus had disturbed the outer containment, and in doing so, had functionally announced himself. It knew he was there. It was paying attention in a way it hadn't paid attention in a long time. She spent the rest of that day working. Marcus and Danny helped where she asked them to and stood back when she told them to stand back, which was most of the time. She worked in the basement. She worked at the four corners of the house. She worked at the north wall, both inside and outside, at the disturbed trench, which had been backfilled by then. She did not explain what she was doing while she was doing it. When she was finished, the air in the basement felt different. Marcus noticed it immediately, the way you notice when a sound you've been hearing for so long it became background noise suddenly stops. Not silent exactly, just different, like something had shifted its weight. Before she left, she gave Marcus a set of instructions. She was clear and serious and did not frame them as suggestions. He was not to dig anywhere on the property. Not for any reason, not for any depth, not even to plant a garden or set a fence post. He was not to move or disturb anything old he found inside the house, not to rearrange the basement, not to touch the circle under any circumstances. He was to avoid the basement between midnight and 3 in the morning specifically, that window, that 3-hour period every night. He was to leave a specific offering at the northeast corner of the house on the 1st of every month. She told him exactly what this consisted of and how it was to be prepared. And he was to find someone with deeper knowledge of Della Cartwright's specific tradition who could work toward a more permanent solution, because what she had done was stabilization, not resolution. The permanent resolution would require someone who understood what Della had built, not just generally, but specifically, and that was a depth of knowledge she did not have. Marcus asked what would happen if he followed the instructions. She said it would stay quiet. She asked what would happen if he didn't. She thought about this for a moment. She said the thing in the ground was not evil in any simple sense. Evil was a human concept, a relational concept, a thing that existed in the space between a harm and someone who could be harmed by it. What was in the land beneath Cartwright Farm was older than the concept. It wasn't trying to destroy Marcus. It didn't want anything from him in a human sense. It was simply very old and very present and increasingly specific in its awareness of him. And the more specific that awareness became, the harder it became to maintain the separation between his reality and its reality. And in her experience, when that separation eroded far enough, there was no coming back from it. Not intact anyway, not as yourself. She left. Danny went back to Lexington. Marcus stood alone in his farmhouse and looked at the kitchen door to the basement and thought about Della Cartwright, who had lived here alone for more than 20 years with this thing beneath her feet, who had kept it contained and satisfied and managed, who had made herself the guardian of something she was afraid of because the alternative was to leave it unguarded, and who had disappeared. On a September night in 1961, when a boy on the neighboring property heard something that wasn't a scream, something more like an ending, he followed the instructions. The months that followed were the hardest of Marcus's life, and he says this as a man who has been through a divorce, a job loss, a stretch of years in his late 20s where nothing worked and nothing moved, and he genuinely wasn't sure he was going to find his way out. The hardness was not dramatic. There were no physical events, no objects moving through the air, no sudden apparitions. The hardness was the sustained, low-frequency awareness that something beneath the house knew he was there, knew his schedule, knew when he slept and when he didn't, knew the pattern of his footsteps on the floorboards above it. The dreams continued but changed. The shape that stood in the corner of his room at night became less angry and more patient. It had made a decision to wait. Marcus understood, in the part of himself that understood things he couldn't explain, that this was not better. Patience in something that old and that large was not reassuring. It meant it had assessed the situation and determined that waiting was to its advantage. That was a thing with a strategy. That was a thing that believed it was going to win. He kept up the monthly offering. He stayed out of the basement in the 3-hour window every night. He didn't dig. He didn't move anything. He lived carefully, attentively, the way you live when you know the floor is thin in certain places. He found his way to the right person after about 8 months. A man named Cyrus, who had grown up in eastern Tennessee and who had, through a chain of connections that traced back through 2 generations of workers, studied under someone who had known and learned from Della Cartwright herself. Not directly, not personally, there had been a generation between them. But the tradition was the same, the specific form of working Della had practiced, and Cyrus knew its architecture in a way that let him look at what was in that basement floor and understand what he was looking at. He came to the farmhouse in early summer. He and Marcus worked together for 3 weeks. Marcus is careful about describing what that looked like, not evasive, but precise in a way that itself communicates something. He says it isn't the kind of thing that translates into language without either trivializing it or making it sound like a movie. He says there were moments of work that he participated in and understood the function of, even if he couldn't have explained the mechanism. He says Cyrus knew what he was doing in the same way a very skilled surgeon knows what they're doing, the confidence of someone working in a system that has been refined over generations. He says he trusted it, not because he understood it, but because of the thing that happened when it was done. The change was immediate and total. Marcus says it was like a sound stopping. Not a loud sound, something he had largely habituated to, like the hum of an appliance you only notice when it finally shuts off. A pressure behind his eyes he hadn't consciously registered in months. A slight tension in every room of the house that he had somehow accepted as normal. All of it simultaneously gone. The air in the basement changed. He went down there on the first morning after the work was complete, in full daylight, and stood in the middle of the room, and it was just a basement. Old and concrete and faintly musty, the way basements are. Nothing else. The circle on the floor had faded. Not disappeared. Still there if you knew to look for it. The lines still faintly traceable in the concrete. But something in it had quieted. Cyrus said this was expected. That what Della had put into it had been released the way you release something when it's no longer needed, deliberately, carefully, at the appropriate moment. The circle wasn't gone because Della's work was worth preserving, worth remembering, worth leaving in place as a record of what she had done and what it had cost her. Marcus slept without dreams that night for the first time in 8 months. He lay in the dark in his house in Harlan County and listened to the mountains outside and felt the specific, quiet, remarkable relief of a weight that has been lifted from a place that had been so long under weight that relief itself felt new. He still lives there. He still follows a modified version of the rules, not out of fear, he says, but out of something that has become, over these 18 months, genuinely like respect. The same respect you have for a river or a mountain or any large indifferent natural system, not because it's trying to hurt you, because it's bigger than you and it doesn't particularly care about you, and that indifference, given the right circumstances, is the most dangerous thing in the world. What I keep coming back to, and I've thought about this story many times since I first heard it, is Della Cartwright in that farmhouse alone in the years before 1961. I think about her making her monthly offerings. I think about her moving through the rooms of that house with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows exactly which floorboards not to step on and exactly why. I think about her drawing that circle on the basement floor and putting every piece of what she knew into it, making it as solid and as lasting as she could, knowing she wouldn't be around forever to maintain it. I think about what it must have felt like to have called something up from the earth that was older and larger than anything she had prepared for, and to have chosen, in the face of that, not to run, not to abandon the land and leave whatever she had drawn up there unguarded, to stay, to do the work, to keep the thing in the ground satisfied and contained and manageable for as long as she could. There is something in that decision that I find genuinely moving, alongside everything I find genuinely frightening about it. Della Cartwright was afraid. She was clearly, manifestly afraid of what she had spent her life working with. And she stayed anyway. She stayed and she worked and she kept the thing in the ground, and the people around her, the people on the neighboring farms, the people in the towns below the mountain, none of them knew. None of them knew there was a woman on Cartwright Farm standing between them and something they had no framework for understanding. Just a woman alone in a house on 11 acres, doing a thing that no one around her could see or measure or thank her for. Until one September night in 1961, when the light went out in the basement window and a 15-year-old boy on the next property heard something that wasn't a scream, something that was more like an ending. And in the morning, Della was gone and everything in the house was undisturbed and her shoes were still by the door. What happened to her that night is something no one has ever been able to determine. Maybe the thing she had contained for so long finally grew large enough to break through what she had built. Maybe something went wrong in the working. Some small error in a system with no tolerance for error. Maybe she had simply been doing it alone for so long, with no one to help her. No one who knew what she knew, and she had finally run out of the thing that had kept her going. Whatever the answer is, it lives in the same silence that Harlan County has been keeping for 60 years, in the same soil that held those objects for over a century, in the same circle still faintly visible on a concrete basement floor in a farmhouse that a mechanic from Louisville bought because the price was almost nothing, and the mountains were beautiful and he needed a clean start. He got something. It wasn't what he expected, but he's still there, which is maybe the thing that matters most. He's still there and the foundation is solid, and the crack in the north wall has been repaired. And on the first of every month, without fail, he goes to the northeast corner of the house and leaves what he was told to leave, because some knowledge once learned is knowledge you keep. Now I want to hear from you, and I genuinely mean that, not as a thing I'm supposed to say, but as something that is actually true about why I do this. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what part of this sat with you. Tell me if you found something you couldn't explain on a property you lived in. Tell me if you've had dreams in a new house that felt like they belonged to the house more than to you. I read the comments, I read all of them. The best stories from this community have started in a comment on a video just like this one. And if this one got under your skin tonight, if you found yourself checking the corners of the room while you were listening, do me a favor and share it. Send it to someone who needs a reason to leave the lights on. Post it somewhere. Let it find the people it's supposed to find. That's how the fear sermon grows, one unsettled person at a time. Subscribe if you haven't already. Come back next time, and in the meantime, maybe sleep with something on. Not the overhead light, just something. A lamp, something small, the kind of light that makes the corners visible. Some cracks, after all, are not about settling. And some things, once you've touched them, leave a little of themselves behind on your hands.